The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. After leaving the mountain, Jesus and his disciples made their way through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know, because he was instructing his disciples. He was telling them, "The Son of Man will be delivered into the hands of men. They will put him to death. And 3 days after he has been put to death, he will rise again." But they did not understand what he said and were afraid to ask him. They came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, "What were you arguing about on the road?" They said nothing, because they had been arguing which of them was the greatest. So he sat down, called the 12 to him, and said, "If anyone wants to be first, he must make himself last of all and servant of all." He then set him in him, put his arms round him, and said to them, "Anyone who welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And anyone who welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
So hopefully you saw some of the connections as we listened to the readings this evening. When you listen to St. James, he is talking about the war that goes on inside us to start with, isn't he? And remember, St. Paul did something similar. He said, "I can't understand my own behavior" on one occasion. Why is it that when I want to do good, evil comes to hand? But as we know, he goes on to say, by the grace of God, I am what I am. Eventually, Paul realizes that extraordinary paradox that it's when he's weak that he's strong. And I was saying to you about putting the jigsaw together. Notice again this evening, the disciples didn't understand what Jesus was saying. We know that. They struggled. And in fact, when the crunch came and Jesus was arrested, they disappeared off the scene. Peter denied he even knew him, and so on. It's all our stories. We struggle to understand. And yet we're here tonight, once again, making this huge act of faith that actually we've got a glimpse of how the jigsaw can be put together. And occasionally we need a bit of inspiration. Now, I don't know how many of you follow what goes on across the water, but you know we have a royal family. And strangely enough, I think they're still quite popular in Ireland, in spite of all the history, and extraordinarily enough in America. But the recent wedding at Windsor Castle was a happy occasion, thanks be to God. And I think, fascinatingly, even the royal family were a bit taken aback by the preacher. In case you didn't see even a little newsreel of it, it was an American Episcopalian bishop called Michael Curry. Some commentators say that he stole the show. He certainly was tremendous, and I was very, very impressed, I must say. And I'd just like to share with you a couple of the quotations. I've been dining out on it ever since. Any wedding I have now, they get these quotations and so on. But I want to share them with you tonight. He began by quoting Dr. Martin Luther King, whom you remember was murdered because he himself stood up for justice in his own time. This is what Martin Luther King had said: "We must discover the power of love." And this is what really captured me. The redemptive power of love. A redemptorist immediately kind of springs to life if somebody mentions the word. And he went on, and when we do that, we will make of this old world a new world. For love is the only way. And then Michael Curry went on, there's power in love. Don't underestimate it. This is always important, the next bit for the young couples. Don't over-sentimentalize it. There is power in love. And he goes on then to remind us of where this love comes from. It's what we've been talking about all week, that we are made in the image of God. In other words, we're made to share in the life of God, which is itself love. And then he goes on, that's what love is. Love is not selfish and self-centered. Love can be sacrificial, and in doing so, it becomes redemptive. And that way of unselfish, sacrificial, redemptive love changes lives, and it can change the world. Now, in our better moments, we know this is true from our experience. And we must never give up on loving, because that is precisely the story of Jesus of Nazareth. He would not give up on loving, and he went to his own death because of that. Because of the very thing that the Book of Wisdom was saying, let's put this to the test. Let's test his gentleness. People feel threatened by goodness and try to do away with it. But of course, they don't do away with it. You can't kill love. And the whole mystery of it, of course, is that Jesus rose from the dead. He was foretelling that in today's gospel. We're going to focus very much on that tomorrow, because we're going to be praying for those who've gone before us. And our belief is that he's gone to prepare a place for all of us. In my Father's house, there are many rooms. The focus will be on that tomorrow. But for tonight, I want you just to focus on what Jesus left us. This is the greatest way in which we can celebrate his presence with us. In the celebration of the Mass, we're not just looking back nostalgically to the Last Supper and Good Friday, and above all Easter Sunday and then the Ascension. We actually believe that those events become present for us here and now. And so this morning, and again this evening, I'll just share with you the most wonderful poem, I believe, on the Mass, written by, here's another Jesuit for you, if you didn't hear me say, as I say, it's a sign of the healing power of the Lord that the Redemptorists are speaking well of the Jesuits. Actually, that's not quite true. Do you know St. Alphonsus was a great defender of the Jesuits? The Jesuits were suppressed during the 18th century, and Alphonsus defended them. So I feel I'm in good company by having made friends with quite a number of Jesuits over the year. I wish I could have met this man, but he died in 1955, and I'm going to go back to him tomorrow as well, because I've got a wonderful story about him and his death. So I'm dangling carrots to try and get you back all the time. But anyway, his name, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin. Some of you may have heard of him. He was a French priest. He was actually, I was doing some work just a few weeks ago with the military chaplains in England. All three services came together to look at how they were going to cope with the future. And while I was talking to them, I thought, I'll use Teilhard de Chardin. And then I suddenly thought, I'm fairly sure he was a military chaplain during the First World War. And of course, I have a particular interest in the First World War because my own father fought in the First World War, born in 1897, left school at 18, joined the South Wales Borderers, and had a pretty torrid time. But anyway, Teilhard de Chardin, I found it all on the internet. The great thing is now you just type it in, and there was a great piece about his wartime chaplaincy. So I shared all that with the military chaplains, but I'm not going to spend time on that tonight. I just want to share with you this extraordinary poem that he wrote about the Mass. But I also want to remind you, because we're struggling in all sorts of areas at the moment as a family, as the church. It was ever thus. We've never ever got it sorted out, even from apostolic times, as we know. But it is sad that somebody as gifted as this French priest, who was not only a very good priest, a very good theologian, but also a scientist in his own right. He was a paleontologist. He spent a lot of time researching, collecting fossils, traveling the world. And he had this wonderful cosmic vision of what God was doing. And he saw the way that creation, including human beings, had evolved down through the centuries. But his writings were too much for Rome at the time, and so he was not able to publish his work while he was alive. But what an extraordinarily humble man. He didn't kick up a fuss and push off and say, blow the church. He stayed peacefully, and when you hear the story tomorrow, I think you will see what I mean. However, for tonight, this will be enough. I have a vivid memory. I'm going right back to early 1973 when I was on a school mission in the northeast of England with a confrère of mine. And really, he introduced me to Teilhard de Chardin because at a school mass with a group of 12 or 13-year-olds, in what you would have said was an impossible set of circumstances, to speak about a poem written by a priest decades before, with a group of children who were restless. It was one of those awful, damp, miserable days. There was a smell of school dinners in the hall. And somehow he captured their imagination and spoke about the Mass in a way which I've never forgotten, and I've shared it on many occasions with young and old alike. If you want to read the poem for itself, you'll realize I'm not really doing it justice. All you need to do is type in the Mass on the world, and I guarantee the name Teilhard de Chardin will come up, and you can read the poem in whatever language you like, probably. The story was this. He was out exploring in the Far East, and he got up one morning and went for a walk, as he often did, and he had risen to the top of a small mountain. The sun was coming up on the horizon, and it was one of those breathtaking views. And at that moment, he felt moved and close to his Creator in a way that made him want to be as perfectly united with his Creator as he possibly could be. And of course, as a Christian and as a priest, he felt a great desire to celebrate Mass. But it was not possible. He had no wine, he had no water, there was no altar. So what did he do? He went to his satchel and he took out a piece of paper and he wrote this poem. And essentially what he was saying was, for my altar I take the world that lies before me. Indeed, more than that, the whole of the cosmos. And we know how extraordinary that is. It's beyond our imagination when we think of all the galaxies and stars and anyway. And then he said, I have no bread. I take, he said, for my pattern and for my bread what I could only see in my mind's eye. Beyond the horizon, there are thousands, millions of people rising from their beds this morning to go to work by the sweat of their brow, in the fields and the factories, in the offices, in the colleges and schools. He said, I take their work, I place it on my pattern, and I offer it to God. He had no wine. For his wine, he takes again what he can only see in his mind's eye, beyond the horizon, the thousands, millions of people, many of whom will not rise from their beds because they are suffering so much. He takes their suffering, he takes those who will die, their deaths, he places them in his chalice and he offers them to God. And then he goes on to explore the mystery of the Mass, the drama of what Jesus has given us, of how the Spirit of God then takes these gifts and transforms them into Christ himself. He looks at the power of the world around us, the power of fire and water. And he sees it all caught up in the mystery of the sacramental life of the church. And then he recognizes what Christ does with these gifts. Having transformed them, he gives himself back to us so that he can feed us with himself and his life, and so that we can be united with him and therefore with the Father. That's what we celebrate every time we gather round this altar. Let's thank God for the faith that has brought us together tonight. And let's pray that the Lord will continue to strengthen that faith and deepen our love for one another, for God our Creator, and for the whole of the cosmos. We'll join together in praying our Novena prayer. Mother of perpetual help, with the greatest confidence we come before your holy picture to be inspired by the example of your life. We think of you at that moment when, full of faith and trust, you accepted God's call to be the mother of his Son. Help us, your children, to accept with joy our own calling in life. When you learnt that your cousin Elizabeth was in need, you immediately went to serve her and offer your help. Help us, like you, to be concerned for others. We think of you, Mother, at the foot of the cross. Your heart must have bled to see your Son in agony, but your joy was great when he rose from the dead, victorious over the powers of evil. Mother of sorrows, help us through the trials and disappointments of life. Help us not to lose heart. May we share with you and your Son the joy of having courageously faced up to all the challenges of life. Amen. So let's pray together. O Mother of perpetual help, with grateful hearts we join you in thanking God for all the wonderful things he has done for us, especially for giving us Jesus, your Son, as our Redeemer. O God, Creator, we thank you for the gift of life and all the gifts of nature, our senses and faculties, our talents and abilities. We thank you for creating us in your image and likeness, and for giving us this earth to use and develop, to respect and cherish. Despite our failures, you continue to show us today by increasing the life of your Spirit in us at the Eucharistic table. Finally, we thank you, loving Father, for giving us Mary, the mother of your Son, to be our mother of perpetual help. We are grateful for all the favors we have received through her intercession. We pray that those past favors may inspire us to greater confidence in your loving mercy and to seek the aid of our mother of perpetual help. Amen.